Hello, everyone. And first of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Laura Noriega from the ICLE World Secretariat. And I want to present to you, we're going to present this day on behalf of the ICLE, on behalf of the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities and the GPC Resource Team, the webinar Urban GHG Emissions Evolutions of Accounting Frameworks. The resource team and the Global Platform for Sustainable Cities participate in several peer exchange and knowledge transfer activities, and this is one of those. And as part of the webinars, we want to create capacity building and exchange some successful experiences that can help all local governments and other cities to engage in the climate atmosphere. So let's go with our webinar. This will be based on the GHG reporting guidance. The Global Covenant of Measures is launching the new common reporting framework, now recommended use for cities in the world. It provides tight guidelines for GHG accounting, along with other topics such as integrated climate action planning and others. We will be discussing here the added value of the common reporting framework, how the common reference framework and global protocol for city-scale GHG inventories are complementary, how it fits the IPCC guidelines, and which reporting platforms for local governments accommodate this framework. With us will be today Cesar Carreño. He will be our speaker. He's a senior officer here at ICLE World Secretariat. And we're glad to have him on board. He has been working with the GCOM and with this GPC and the common framework, and he can explain us more in this. So I will give the word to Cesar, but not before telling you, you are starting in mute. If you have any questions, you can please write down in the box. We will have then later some opportunity for questions, and please, I'll be happy to give the floor. So just raise your hand if you have any question, and we'll be happy to give some minutes for questions after Cesar's presentation. So Cesar, please, you have the word.
Well, thank you, Laura. A very warm welcome to everybody who is attending today's webinar. We have a great attendance here, 30 people, if I'm not mistaken. Some familiar people that I have the pleasure of sharing the webinars with. I'm very happy to have you here, and this webinar will give you guidance on how the reporting frameworks have evolved, how they integrate to each other, how do they accommodate the needs, why have they evolved in certain ways, how do they take the comments from practitioners, from cities, from policymakers, and what is the need of constantly enhancing and leveraging the current reporting frameworks to allow the development of more stronger policies and cleaner data for aggregation. Our procedure today will take us throughout the whole storyline since the inception of the IPCC 1996 guidelines, the city context, city scales guidelines for GHG accounting from IPCC to GPC, and from GPC to the common reporting framework from the Global Covenant of Measures for Climate and Energy. As mentioned on the description of the webinar, this is mostly oriented with people which have certain level of experience and is familiar with the terms that we will discuss here. Should you have a question during the development of the webinar, please keep it until the final minutes, which we will be happy to respond to any inquiries that you might have. So initially, there is the 2006 IPCC guidelines for national greenhouses inventories, which focus on country level, and of course these were produced at the invitation of the United Nations, and is an updated on the revised 1996 guidelines, and the good practice that was published that year includes evolution on certain sectors, certain gases, certain methodologies, certain terminology. And of course, it provides an international agreed methodologies, which can be cross-cutting at horizontal level across all nations around the world, and is intended for country level only. This means that it might not take into consideration transboundary emissions per se. So it's pretty geographic contained, physically contained, although certain countries have tried to adapt and somehow have included very particular points of information to enhance their inventory. Nonetheless, the IPCC 2006 guidelines are very robust and very explanatory and very self-contained. There is a wider range of tools, of documents, of manuals, guidebooks available for all of the users, and inventory compilers. So inventory compilers, normally they want to prepare inventory estimators for the first time, and there are particular sections for this purpose. The IPCC 2006 guidelines focus on scope, approach, and structure of the inventory. So it is focusing 5 particular points. The first one is anthropogenic emissions and removals, as we can see here. Then the national territories, the inventory year and time series, and inventory reporting. So if you take into account that anthropogenic emissions and removals, this includes 2 key sectors. The emissions, which take place during the combustion of fossil fuels, and also as well the removals, which is considered a subsector for carbon sinks, meaning forestry and land use change and agriculture. Then we have national territory, meaning that is geographic-based emissions only happening within the physical boundaries of a state or of a nation. The inventory year and time series, which include how many inventories during a certain period of time a country will develop. So this is included within their own monitoring, reporting, and verification framework, which is developed and created by countries on its own. And of course, where to report the inventory, where to submit this inventory to allow close monitoring for international organizations, most likely the UNFCCC. Now, in regards to which gases are included, for the 2006 guidelines, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide has always been included. But as well, we have other type of gases like HFCs, the hydrofluorocarbons, PFCs, the perfluorocarbons, sulfur hexafluoride, nitrogen trifluoride, difluoromethyl sulfur pentafluoride, which are much more complex gas molecules which are created at industrial level. And lately has included the halogenated ethers and other halocarbons, which not covered by the Montreal Protocol, which we can see the type of molecule used is not found naturally. No, so the evolution has allowed a certain level of granularity, particularly for industrialized nations and countries which generate this type of gases within their own boundaries. Regarding the sectors and categories, there is energy, industrial processes and product use, IPPU, agriculture, forestry and other land use, waste, and of course others which can be considered indirect emissions from nitrogen deposition from non-agriculture sources. I will explain this further within the next slides. The IPCC methodology has been on constant revision and evolution. Initially, the ground was laid by the guidelines for national GHG inventories. Later on, there were the revised guidelines for national GHG inventories in 1996. In the 2000, the good practice guidance and uncertainty managing national GHG inventories, which it was not an updated version of the previous document, but was more a complementary documentation and guidance to allow refined methods for cleaner and transparent data. In 2003, good practice guidance for land use change, and forestry, which includes land use change, and forestry, LULUCF. And in 2006, the IPCC revised guidelines for national GHG inventories, which is enhanced and naturally evolved documentation from the 1996 revised guidelines. There were some small chapters corrections and 10 corrigendas, which we can find in the following years, from 2007 to 2018, and in between, approximately one per year until 2011. 2007, 2008, 9, twice in 2010, 11, then 13, 14, 15, and lately in 2018. So this means that methodologies have been revised, terminology has been updated, and the inquiries and requests from practitioners have been heard. Without this period of time, several documents were published and made available for the common of practitioners, which includes, of course, several different volumes, including general information on how to calculate the data, methodologies, how to report, terminology, etc. So initially, there is the general guidance on reporting document, which later on was complemented by the second volume, which is addressed to energy. The third volume is IPPU, Industrial Products and Product Use. The fourth volume is Agriculture, Forestry, and Land Use. And the fifth volume, is regarding waste. All of these documentation complement each other. And although not precisely serialized, they can be used in independent pillars because all of them tackle different sectors. As I mentioned before, I will clarify ahead what were the sectors about. And here you can see the sectoral breakdown of the previously mentioned sectors or pillars of the IPCC 2006 guidelines. Within energy, the energy sector includes stationary combustion, mobile combustion, fugitive emissions, CO2 transfer, injection, and geological storage. So as you can see, energy puts together stationary and mobile, and this is a slight difference that we will see when we refer to the GPC and with the common reporting framework. If we move ahead, we have the IPPU sectoral breakdown, which includes mineral industry, chemical, metal, several types of industry particularly, and gases which belong only to this particular sector, either use or generation of this type of gases. If we move to a follow, we can see the usual suspects: forest land, cropland, grassland, wetlands, settlements, other lands, nitrates and CO2 emissions from lime and urea use, and of course livestock manure management, which is not 100% or directly derived from combustion, like fossil fuel. No? This type of emissions, most of them are generated due to anaerobic digestion or to other physiological processes naturally occurring in nature. For waste, we have emissions of waste depending on the type of treatment. Here we can see solid waste disposal, which includes landfills and anaerobic digestion, biological treatment of waste, incineration and open burning, and of course wastewater treatment and discharge. This does not change drastically within the city level frameworks for generation of greenhouse gases. So what was the main objectives of this updated and revamped IPCC guidance from 2006, of course, to ensure continuity of methods, but of course with minor changes. Regarding the energy emissions in the carbon content of the emissions, and of course inclusion of suggested subcategories for several types of industries and construction, which includes mining, wood and wood products, construction, textile, leather, and of course included a new category which was road transport and Europe-based catalysts. Regarding industrial processes, included process chemistry and mass balance methodology. For land use, included the principle of emissions and removals for carbon stocks, and growth versus decay, input versus output as well. For waste, include fossil and biogenic carbon in waste, as we can see, so we can establish the difference between carbon 14 and 12, which is fossil and then biological carbon, to make a proper differentiation, to refine and have more granulated transparent numbers. For the IPPU, identify byproducts or fugitive emissions from certain type of industry, particularly electronics and computers, the production of magnesium and halogenated compound production. So there were certain subsectors which were aligned and updated according to the natural evolution of the industry around the world and the rise of this type of industries in developed and developing countries. Now, why was there the need to downscale or to refine the national framework at city context? Because cities behave different than a country. They have faster response rates. There's, depending on how the governance is structured, if they are very independent with their own budget, very independent with their own policy development, and the sectoral approaches may differ. Why? Because it needs cleaner data and accurate sectorization, so you can develop specific policies which might not be the case at country level. It can provide first-hand data due to the close proximity of the authorities and the actual source of emissions. Is a segregation process from bottom-up approach and can fit the national inventories as well. So this will ease the burden on national governments, and is a horizontal cooperation for comparability and replication at both subnational, national, regional, and international level. A few examples of these statements. All countries have airports, but not all cities have airports. Not all cities have fluvial transportation or water transportation. Not all cities have massive industrial parks. Sometimes cities are fully dedicated to financial services, not precisely industry. Public transportation may vary from city to city. Some cities have trams, some cities don't have tram, have a BRT or a metro. And of course, public policies may vary from city to city, depending on what is the main need of the city, and the project implementation may vary from city to city. So time is different. They want to allocate resources to certain sector or subsector. They want to tackle some mixed sector, like for instance, adaptation and mitigation, using a new tree coverage, or they want to tackle mitigation and urban health with air quality measures, which of course will include CO2 and methane, and the reduction of emissions of VOCs and PM2.5 and PM10. So there are several reasons why it was important to tailor a national framework to a city level. Hence, several countries and organizations decided to develop their own frameworks for reporting. We can see here the PS 2070, which is available for cities within the UK, the specification for assessment of greenhouse emissions of a city, the bilan carbon, which is used within France and promoted in Francophone countries, and of course, the Global Protocol for Community Scaled GHG Emission Framework, the GPC, which was developed by the World Resources Institute, C40, and ICLEI. So they may differ in certain aspects, but because the geographic scope of the PS 2017 in Great Britain and Bilan Carbon in France, we will align the GPC directly to the IPCC because both were developed uh, with the world in mind, no? So they can tackle the world, the whole globe regarding cities emissions. No? So here I have a few examples of graphics, how each different inventory compiler express their own emissions. And although somebody might say that, of course, we have emissions for electricity or for heat, etc., it is important to highlight that these emissions are included within buildings, and buildings can include, of course, residential, commercial, um, industrial facilities, no? And it is important to highlight that even though the IPCC makes these distinctions for cities, it might not be that very useful. Why? Because as you can see here, um, buildings, they don't have emissions on their own. They have emissions because they consume electricity and heat based on X source of energy, no? And of course, other type of energy as well might be in use electricity. So uh, certain parts of emissions from industry, mainly from buildings operation, include also electricity and heat. So it needs to be better refined for city level purposes. And this type of definition is repeated throughout certain um, inventories. As we can see here, we have the emissions from Toronto. They also mentioned it, covered like buildings. Here we have another inventory also mentioned buildings, and down here we have another inventory which also mentions this as buildings. And all of this is directly connected, and of course terminology needs to be common across all levels of users, because some users name it as buildings, some other users name it as stationary energy, some other users naming according to the type of use that they have. So the whole purpose was to have common vocabulary or common jargon to allow for a smooth aggregation of numbers. No? Here we have a breakdown of the sectors and subsectors which are included under the IPCC, and here you can see that they do not name them like buildings. Here you can see that you have commercial, institutional emissions, residential, and it's not named buildings. Even in the IPCC, it's not named directly buildings, but nonetheless, for some strange reason, some people name them buildings. If we keep on moving, then of course we will see that there are other small variations on this regard. So now, how do we get all of the information that we have on the IPCC reporting framework and transform it into a very transparent, complete, consistent, and comparable and accurate methodology? Well, we decided, along with the partners and the city policymakers, that they needed to downscale this into city level, because national level is not 100% accurate to represent the emissions of a city. Hence, the city level frameworks were created. Within this regard, of course, the GPC was developed together with ICLEI, C40 Cities, and the World Resource Institute in a joint effort due to their experience with cities, and they heard the cities' inquiries and suggestions. And first, there was a pilot version that was rolled out, and later on was revamped and enhanced for the version 2.0, which is the currently available version for cities and practitioners of all levels. So how do they compare to each other? Here we can see that the IPCC have the four main sectors, and of course there is a certain variation, although they do not clash. They complement each other. They can be aggregated following very particular indications. Energy for the GPC is split between stationary energy and transportation. IPPU stays the same, waste stays the same, and AFOLU stays the same. So the main variation is in energy that for IPCC contains all of the energy emissions, either electricity or fossil fuel combustion. And for the GPC, of course, splits in stationary energy, which is used mainly in facilities, buildings, and of course, for transportation is every source of emission that moves around the city. Now, how do these compare to each other? Let's go sector by sector. Here we have the first share, which is energy, and the IPCC versus stationary energy on the IPCC. I mapped out the equivalent for the IPCC in blue and the equivalent for the GPC in green. As you can see, they have somehow the same names, but the IPCC arranged them also including nomenclature by name, by numbers and letters, sorry. But they are equivalent 100%. There is absolutely no considerable deviation on the intended way of aggregating or reporting GHG inventories. This means that it should not be a problem for users of the GPC to aggregate this to national level. So they do not clash. They can be used in a complementary level, but the end user is different. That's the only visible difference, if we might say. So for stationary energy, here you can see all of the sectors and subsectors that were included. This is the IPCC distribution, and here you have highlighted in green all of the sectors and subsectors which were included, like non-specified, for residential, commercial, etc., industry, energy industries. Of course, there were certain refine of data if you go deeper within the subsectors, but in general overview, they remain the same. So what happened to the other half for the IPCC transportation, which doesn't exist by name as a sector per se, but it's included on the energy. It also mirrors exactly what the GPC is trying to express. You have on-road transportation under the GPC, and for the IPCC is called road transportation. Civil aviation, railways, waterborne navigation, and other transportation. So they mirror each other, although with slightly different names. Here are the subsectors which were included for the IPCC and that are included under transportation. As you can see here, transport is one of the subsectors under energy, which have fuel combustion activities and then transport. For energy, includes as well, sorry, this should be waste. My mistake. This should be waste, sorry. So for waste, of course, all of the sectors mirror each other as well. There's absolutely no significant difference, and all of the sectors are included. This is the IPCC structure of the waste sector, and as you can see, all of these sectors are included under the type of treatment of the waste. So this means that they do not clash. There, I have seen some people which has their constraints on using the GPC at subnational level because they say it's a different way of reporting. Actually, it's not. Just the name changes and maybe how you allocate the emissions which are under the influence of the city government and which emissions are not under the influence of the city government. And this allows for better policy development. So how has the GPC been used? Where the Compact of Mayors in 2014, launched in 2014, adopted the GPC as a new standard methodology for all of the cities that wanted to participate within this initiative. The RAMCC, the Red Argentina de Municipalidades contra el Cambio Climático, the Argentina Network of Municipalities adopted GPC as their de facto framework. This does not mean that it's the national framework. This means it's the reporting framework of this particular red network, which does not have all of the cities of Argentina. It has a small cluster of cities, but all of them are using GPC. Costa Rica national guidelines use a lot of elements of the GPC and mix them with the IPCC. Urban Nets, which is a project in which ICLEI coordinated, uses the GPC as the national standard methodology for project deliverables. The Korean Environmental Corporation, KECO, is currently in the process of adapting their tool to reproduce both IPCC and GPC-based inventories. Why? Because the national framework of South Korea is IPCC, but internationally cities are communicating each other mostly with GPC inventories should they belong to certain initiative. Both ICLEI and C40 have advocated for the use of GPC. I have developed tools for this purpose, which include Series, which is a C40-based tool, and ClearPath, which is a ICLEI-based tool, and HeatPlus, also an ICLEI-based tool. Over 200 inventors have been reviewed using the GPC from all continents and size of cities, which combine ICLEI and C40 efforts. The World Bank developed a program, which is the City Climate Planner Program, which uses GPC as the backbone for accreditation. That means that they train professionals to develop, to interpret, to validate, and for further training based on the GPC. Cities like Paris, New York, Tokyo, Durban, Rio de Janeiro, Mexico City have developed their inventories using GPC, some of them using both GPC and any other methodology that they might have used initially. And the GPC has been used as a cornerstone for developing the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, the Common Reporting Framework, which also borrows elements from the GPC, but also elements from IPCC and from the MEI methodology from the European Covenant of Mayors, the Baseline Emissions Inventory, Monitoring Emissions Inventory methodology and reporting framework. So hence the GPC has been widely promoted and encouraged and amplified throughout all of these past 5 years around the world. Now, let's jump from the GPC into the new reporting framework, which was launched last year, is the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy Common Reporting Framework. So here a little background on the GCOM, which is the Global Covenant. The Global Covenant was born from the merging of the two largest coalition of cities fighting against climate change, which was the Covenant of Mayors, which was a European-based initiative, and the Compact of Mayors, a global focused initiative. So both of them have their own methodologies, but in the good spirit of allowing cities for a smooth transition and for more detailed information to allow the aggregation and research, started discussions to develop a new common reporting framework that can be used around the world. In order to do this, several technical working groups were developed, including the Technical Working Group on Emissions and Targets, which included ICLEI, C40, the World Resources Institute, the Joint Research Center from the European Commission, along with personnel from the Secretariat from the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. This work took over 1.5 years, initially discussing about what would be the main objectives, and later on digging deeper into what would be the actual needs of a city for future reporting. So the launch of the new common reporting framework was announced during COP in Bonn in 2017. As you can see here, it was promoted through available channels, and of course, every key stakeholder was aware of this progress. And of course, there was public consultation all over the world, meaning that all of the cities that were part from either one or the other initiative were communicated and were requested to provide their input and their say on how should the new reporting framework look based on their own experience on the GPC, on the IPCC, or whatever reporting framework they have used. So a poll or a questionnaire was distributed among all of the users from cities and practitioners in order to request their feedback. This means that the common reporting framework has taken into account all of these requests and merge them into what is currently the common reporting framework from the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which aims to more transparency and a proper, a more detailed and granulated breakdown of sectors and subsectors, as I'm going to show you. Ideally, it was intended to be implemented in full force since this year, but internal discussions will allow cities to take this year as a transition period, meaning that until December this year, cities can report either using GPC or, if they feel suitable, the common reporting framework of the GCOM. Why? Because cities need to become familiar with this, and we are currently working on the development and submission of a guidance, a guidebook for practitioners. The communication element is also need to be further developed to create, of course, visual communication for other type of users which are not the inventory developers, like policymakers, like the common of the citizen, etc. So what are the main improvements? We took the sectoral approach from national level, from the IPCC, and then we went to the GPC, and of course we took this sectoral approach and refined the geographic approach for policymaking as of national level. This is for the GPC. What did the common reporting framework? They took all of this and added ease of reporting, creating different levels of reporting, and of course included the energy pillar as well, which was somehow overlooked in other iterations. This includes access to energy, particularly access to renewable energy, in order to highlight the efforts of the cities in generating energy sustainable or in a renewable way. So what are the main difference? So I just linked and map the IPCC versus the GPC. Now I'm going to map and face the GPC versus the common reporting framework. They somehow as well complement each other. That means that they should not, in theory, clash if the user has certain level of experience. Here are the sectors and subsectors for stationary energy from the GPC, as is presented in the Carbon Climate Registry, the reporting platform from ICLE. And what did the common reporting framework did? They took this particular subsector, energy industries, and they took it out of the equation. They created a new subsector apart from all of the main sectors. So this is how it looks on the GPC, and this is how it looks under the common reporting framework. We do not only want to know if your city is generating energy, but how is your city generating energy? And we, of course, created, identified by the type of generation: electricity generation, CHP generation, heat and coal, local renewable generation, so forth and so on. But this it was heavily requested by cities which are currently on this process, moving towards a sustainable energy generation. For the fugitive emissions from mining, processing, storage, and transportation on coal, and fugitive emissions from oil and natural gas systems, for the common reporting framework, these are just called fugitive emissions. This means that these two have merged into one. Other sectors have been completely deleted. For instance, non-specified forces is not included. And this, of course, makes the life of the practitioners easier. We have also identified how the cities use the GPC, and we decided to check which sectors were or more or less used or not used, what were the reasons, and then we refined these in a joint effort. So how the data splits now? If we take energy industries, here we have the common reporting framework, and you can see that all of these sectors all of these sectors either match or replicate each other. So you should be available to create a common reporting framework, GHG emission inventory, if you have enough information on how your energy is generated and the type of facilities that are within the geographic scope of your city. For fugitive emissions, like I mentioned before, two types of fugitive emissions will merge into one field. And the big main differences before, for the GPC, the reporting of the gross domestic product value was mandatory for cities, but cities said, okay, we don't have access to this information. Some cities do not have access, but now we have made it optional for cities. We moved from scopes to direct and indirect emissions as well, to try to align even further to the IPCC and borrowing from the MEI methodology from the European Covenant. Waste emissions based on direct or geographic generation. Non-specified sources are not present anymore. Emissions from leakage are merged in one category. Emissions from energy generation are split by type of generation instead of one holistic overview. It makes emphasis on renewable energy, access to renewable energy, and of course provides detailed guidance for emission trading scheme, sanction or related facilities which are not under the control of the municipality. Now let's say that we want to compare all three of them. No? Here we can see the columns in green are now the current sectors for the common reporting framework, and here we have a comparison how, if you wish to aggregate these numbers to an IPCC based inventory, here are the sectors and how these sectors match the IPCC. And this is something that you will find on the guidebook that will be made available within the next few months. And of course, let's say you have the same type of inventory, but you want to create a GPC based inventory for X or Y reason, because it's a project deliverable, I don't know. As well, the sectors where you can match here, 1.2.1, 1.2.2, which have pretty much the same names, but here you can identify by the nomenclature which is included within the GPC. So this showcases that although with different names and maybe with different sectors and subsectors, the methodologies do not clash with each other. You need certain level of experience for do data aggregation, comparison, interpretation, but they do not clash with each other. It might be that you will need to do some little extra work, for instance, for instead of energy generation, to split by type of an generation facility. But this, at the end of the day, will allow for further policy development and for publicizing the efforts of your city and the local legislation. So what's happening at this point? How can you report this type of inventories? Well, previously you could do it either in CDP or Carbon, which use the GPC, but now CDP and Carbon are working together. Both platforms are coexisting at this point. Carbon Climate Registry it will still be recognized as a central repository for their own initiatives and ICLEI-based initiatives for projects for the NASCA, for the UNFCCC, for the Talanoa Dialogue, etc. While CDP will be the entry point, and cities can report through CDP, and CDP has also their own initiatives and clients who they serve, project partners. But instead of working in parallel, they work as a series now. Cities will start reporting on CDP, and should the city ask specifically, this data can be mirrored also on Carbon Climate Registry. This means reporting to one platform, but have their data in both platforms. Currently, my Covenant platform, the platform for the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, is revamping their structure for allowing reporting on the common reporting framework from the GCOM. Hence, within a certain period of time, all platforms will be fully capable of accepting this type of reporting. At this point, only CDP and Carbon are still accepting GPC based inventories, as well as Common Reporting Framework based inventories, while the Common Data Framework for Climate and Energy will slowly start to move from the baseline emission inventory, monitoring emission inventory methodology towards the Common Reporting Framework methodology. As in fact, this week we have been present on the practitioners meeting in regards of the development of the new template for European cities that wish to report using this methodology. Thank you for your attention. I know it's a lot of information to digest. Hopefully I did my best to try to explain this. And now we open the floor for any further questions or inquiries that you would like to make. You have approximately 8 minutes that we can work with you. Just raise your hand or type your questions, and we'll be very pleased to help you out here. Okay, I see a couple of questions here. Let me go through it. Yeah, we have some. Yeah, the first question is, would the guidebook also share how cities who have not reported previously get started from 2019 onwards? Yes, if you have not never reported using any of the standards mentioned here, this will provide a guidance if hopefully cities start to report using the Common Reporting Framework previously to the launch of the guidebook. At this point, we are heavily promoting, but since we allow this year as a transition year, we expect cities to take it a little bit slowly, but hopefully some of them will try to risk. Okay, I see another question here. Let me just read it properly. Okay, Martina Jimenez from Ramsey. Martina, nice having you on board. Yeah, we work very well for you. Yeah, like I mentioned before, CDP and Carbon are not like merging completely, but they will work, instead of working in parallel, they will work in series. So that means that CDP will be the entry point for reporting, but the data will be mirrored in both CDP and Carbon. Carbon has other initiatives and partners that they need to work with using the data, and CDP as well has other initiatives and partners. Both at this time will serve the Global Covenant of Measures for Climate and Energy, which is a common ground for both platforms. But yeah, technically they will be working together, but not fusioning into one entity. Anna Marquez, how are you, Anna? Nice to hear from you. She has a question, appreciate it. Clarification on the GPC, is it being or will it be revised? Okay, yes, we have started conversations to revise the GPC and try to update it this year and align it to the launch and presentation of the assessment report for the IPCC for 2019. So ideally, by this year, there should be a new version of the GPC, which will also align to the Common Reporting Framework in order to avoid further confusion for the further years to come. For waste emissions, it says, does this mean that emissions from waste produced in the city and treated outside the city are not considered? Not necessarily. We are taking into account that this might happen as well, and all of this will be further described within the guidebook to allow for a proper representation. We are allowing further comments, and there will be other cells indicating if, although this is direct or are indirect emissions of yours, or if you are contributing to further emissions. When will we have the new document to start reporting again? Yeah, within the next months, at least until December, everything stays as it is. At some point, we will present a new template which can be used in parallel using the GPC. But starting January next year, only the Common Reporting Framework will be accepted. But by December, hopefully, if time allows, we will update the GPC in order to map 100% the common reporting framework sectors and subsectors. So any further questions? We have a couple more minutes. Okay. If there is no further question, please just let me know how can we help. Of course. And now I'm giving the voice to my colleague Laura Noriega. Please just let us know further if you have any further questions. You saw my contacts, and I think that the recording of this presentation will be made available. No? Okay, Laura, back to you.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance. On behalf of the GPSC research team composed by C40, ECLAIR, and the World Research Institute, sponsored by JEF, we would like to thank for your attention. This webinar will have been safe, and then you will be received the webinar, and you can access also within the GPSC website. You can access to the webinar if you miss it or you want to hear it again for further information. And we'll be happy to join you, to have you also on board. We will have our next webinar on the 4th of April on delivering resilience, delivering local resilience. So we'll be happy also to have you on board. So once again, thank you very much for your attendance, and we'll see you then in our next webinar on the 4th of April. Goodbye.